Great. So welcome everyone. So good to see you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Selene and I'm the host of the Inclusion Conversation. I see that a few of you are joining us for the first time, which is really exciting. So welcome. So if you didn't know before, the Inclusion Conversation is a monthly talk show and we get together to break down borders and bring the world closer together, one conversation at a time. And this month, I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about disability pride, changing the narrative with our guest Celia, and she's going to be introducing herself very shortly. Beforehand, I just want to walk you through how kind of the hour is going to work. The first half hour is going to be Celia and I having a bit of a conversation. I'll be asking her some questions, and that is recorded and that will be shared. So if you're watching the recording, that's the bit that you get. And the second half is actually off the record. I will stop the recording, and then anyone in this live community that is joining us today, thank you so much for joining. You'll be able to jump in, share your own story, what disability pride means to you, or ask any questions that you have. And that, to be honest, that's my favorite part. So anyone watching the recording, you've got to join live next time. In terms of the etiquette for the call, so I've already said that we are recording the first half, cameras on if you're comfortable. We love to see you. We've got the chat function, so any questions, any thoughts, any reactions, pop them into the chat. If you want to tell us how you're feeling with an emoji at any time, that is also awesome. The subtitles are on as well, the closed captions, so they've been enabled, so you should see them. If you're not, just click on the button for closed captions at the bottom of your screen. In terms of the mindset, as always, you know, we come in with an open mind. A lot of the topics we touch on in the inclusion conversation can be sensitive, can be very personal. So I really want to invite everyone to create a safe space and really lead with kindness and respect for each other always. There are no breaks planned. So if you need a break, do take one. That's okay. You don't need to ask for permission. And so without any further ado, we are going to be talking to our guest for this episode, Celia. So I will stop sharing, and Celia, tell us a bit about you.
Thank you so much. For anybody who has a vision impairment, I am a white female. I'm sat in front of a very garish blue wall. I've got long blonde hair and I've got clear glasses and I'm wearing a lot of makeup, let's be honest. And I've got lots of jumpers on because it's freezing cold in my house. So a little bit about myself is I was born with a genetic abnormality called Loeys-Dietz Syndrome. And the way I kind of frame it, just to make light of it, is I say that I'm quite genetically intalented. All the cells that I produce, I don't have enough collagen in my body, which means nothing has elasticity. So all of my organs and right the way through to my muscles and tendons have been affected by it. The main thing wrong with me, I suppose, is I'm now completely nil by mouth, fed via a Hickman line in my chest. My gut and my stomach completely shut down. It's not very fun. The world revolves around food and drink. But aside from that, and the positives, is that I am the co-founding director of the Disability Policy Centre, which is the first think tank in the UK which specifically focuses on accessibility and disability. And what we aim to do is we work with government, with policy leaders, with Westminster, with charities and organisations from public, private and third sector, putting disability at the heart of the agenda. So that's a very brief synopsis about me and what I do.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And you've touched on the fact that you have multiple disabilities, visible and hidden. How would you say that they influence or shape your life?
I think they've shaped me a lot. Like, one of the things that I always kind of preach about is there is this massive misconception that disability is solely negative. And I'm not going to beat around the bush and say, you know, I absolutely love being disabled. It's great. You know, I love the chronic pain. I love not being able to eat, because that's just simply not true. But there are positives that being disabled has given me. And it's not just me. I think it kind of applies to all people that identify as having a disability. It gives you a unique set of attributes, in my opinion. We're incredibly resilient. We're incredibly determined. We constantly are showing up for ourselves and showing up for other people. We have a deep sense of empathy, because we're able to put ourselves in other people's shoes, drawing off our own experiences. And society very quickly twists the word disability to be a solely negative thing. And when we're looking at employment, you know, unconscious ableism that's happening when people are applying for jobs, especially around neurodiversity or learning differences, instantly you go in there and you say, I'm dyslexic. And instantly it's, okay, that person's stupid, they can't read, they can't write. And that's just not the case at all. Actually, that individual is incredibly talented. They're just talented in a different way. But that different way, we still haven't brought into mainstream understanding yet. And it's about promoting, yes, you know, physically, I'm not the strongest bean in the box, but there are other attributes that I have about myself because of my disability that actually makes me the perfect candidate for what I'm trying to do. And it's trying to see past health is wealth. Health is not wealth. Health does not equal productivity. Health does not equal success. But there's still such that mindset of society, and it's about trying to break down as a society how we define being disabled and actually regaining control of the identity and regaining control of the word. For so long, disabled people have been told what it means to be disabled, and actually, you know, we're biting back a little bit now and saying, actually, this is what it means to be disabled, and I'm proud of it. And it's 1 in 5 people. You know, that's there's millions and millions of people just in this country. If you put all the disabled people together in the world, it's larger than the population of China, yet we're still so under talked about in conversation. And how is that happening? I don't really understand. So yeah, I think, you know, disability gets a bad rep, but actually there's a lot of qualities about us which makes us amazing people.
I love that. I love that you've already flipped the script from like the beginning of this conversation, and it's getting a lot of reactions in the chat as well. I love Kat said some of us overcome more challenges just to get out of bed than most people will in a lifetime. That I think is really, really powerful and well said. That attitude, you know, of engagement, and we can hear your passion coming through. You've had that, from what I gather, from a really young age. So can you take us like a little bit back in time and tell us a bit about what was actually your experience like growing up, and, you know, when and how did that engagement start for you?
I think just quickly going to what Kat said before I talk about that is that, you know, if you have a disability, whether that's mental health, whether that's physical, whether it's neurodiversity, whatever it is, every day we show up for ourselves. Every day we have to take that little extra step to do what we need to do just to get through our day. For me, you know, it's plugging in a feeding bag twice a day. For it, you know, it's not pleasant, but every day I'm showing up for myself. And I think that's quite often, if you have something that drains you mentally or drains you physically, it's very easy to look at a period of time, whether that's 1 day or 1 week, and be like, I've not done anything this week. I've not achieved. I've not, you know, everyone around me is doing X, Y, and Z, and I haven't done anything. All I've done is get out of bed and do what I had to do for the day. That in itself is an achievement, because sometimes it's not easy to get out of bed and just do what we need to do. So I think, you know, not comparing ourselves to people that have the same experiences as us, because it's not even comparable. And I think that ties really closely that from a very young age, I saw what was going on around me and what people were doing, and I was constantly trying to keep up with everybody, but my body wasn't letting me do it. So mentally I was striving and striving and striving, and then I'd end up in this kind of cyclical conversation with myself of getting cross with myself because I wasn't able to do it, rather than sitting there and being like, you know, I'm never going to run a marathon. I physically can't do it. I was pushing myself, being like, well, other people can, so why can't I? Rather than stepping back, looking at the issue at hand and being like, right, you know, I want to run a marathon. This is hypothetical, by the way. I've never run a marathon, but I want to run a marathon. Okay, how can I do it in my own way? You know, what equipment could I use, or how could I train differently, or what support could I get to do it? But that wasn't what I was doing. What I was doing is looking at how everybody else was doing it and trying to kind of cookie cutter fit myself into that box, and it wasn't working, and I couldn't understand why. So for years and years and years, I was just attacking myself, and I was being my own worst enemy, and that bled into how I felt about myself and the confidence I had in myself. How are other people going to have confidence in me if I don't have confidence in myself? I'd walk into a job interview or walk into an exam, or walk into whatever it was and feel so small and instantly have set myself up for failure. And having that negative mental attitude did mean that I ended up failing at things because I was trying to do what I just can't do. And as soon as I learned to accept that there are things that I cannot do and never will be able to do, it made me then be able to see past that and think, okay, I can't do that, but I can do this. And I know you can't do that because I'm different and I'm unique. And it was celebrating that, you can't do this and I can, finding the positives in it. But I've had a lot of near-death experiences, shall we say. I've nearly died quite a few times. And that's been very hard to deal with. Dealing with your own mortality as a child is something that you never really, I'm still dealing with it now where, I openly admit that I'm in therapy and I'm not embarrassed about it. And I've been in therapy for 13 years. And I think more people should talk about the fact they're in therapy because it's perfectly normal and it's a healthy thing to do. Looking after your physical body is just as important as looking after your mental health. And that's still something that I talk about is incidences that have happened when I was 4 or 5 years old. And I remember having, a heart attack or whatever it was and constantly being told, this might be your last year, or might not make through this hospital visit, or and that was difficult for my parents as well. But it was, like I said at the beginning, as soon as I learned to accept that this was just how I live, and I just live a little bit differently, and yes, it's unfair, and yes, I don't like it, and yes, it is painful, but actually that doesn't have to stop me, because I got myself so entrenched in that, where if I couldn't do one thing, I couldn't do anything, and that was it, and I was done, because I was never going to be like other people, so why would I even try? Well, the point is you're not like other people. Stop trying to be like other people. Go and forge your own path that no one's done yet. And it's led me here, which is amazing, I suppose.
Well, you covered so much ground in there. I have so many questions, because I feel also now we're entering into the realm of the connection between physical and mental health as well in so many ways. And I think one thing that really stuck with me is, remind me, your physical diagnosis is 1 in how many million?
1 in 70. It's 1 in 70 million, I think it is. There's not very many of us. But yeah, it's ultra rare. But that's hard in itself, having something where, I'm now the UK ambassador for my syndrome. And that's great. And it's meant I've been able to connect people all over the world. And there's little pockets of people all over the world, particularly in America. But it's really hard being part of that rare bracket. And if anybody in this conversation is in that rare bracket, you will know exactly what I'm talking about, of when I go to the hospital and it's a life or death situation and I haven't got the strength in me to explain to you what my condition's called, and more to the point, how you spell it, and you see them running off, going to Google or running to textbooks or whatever it may be. So what I find myself doing is naming the closest condition that I can think of that has the most similarity. So some of you may have heard of Marfans syndrome. So I always just say, I've just got Marfans syndrome. But that's putting me in danger, because I'm not telling them the full situation, but I don't have the capabilities in that moment to be like, it's called Loeys-Dietz syndrome and, X, Y, and Z. So my strongest advice would be, carry stuff on your phone, use the medical ID, carry medical ID. I carry a little pamphlet with me that I just sort of thrust at paramedics when they come towards me. I'm like, don't talk, just read. But it's really hard having something that not many people understand. But I think that lack of understanding is stronger in that rarer category, but actually everybody who identifies as being disabled also struggles with that lack of understanding. Everybody feels that, because unless you've been through it, you do not understand. And that is one of my biggest pet peeves, is when people say to me oh, I broke my leg last year. I really get what it's like to not be able to use your legs. And I think, will you? I know you're saying it with the best intention, but please don't say that, because it's not the same. And I feel for you. I have empathy towards you because I really do understand. but it's not helpful when you try and compare yourself and say, you know, I get it because I had this short period of a broken leg. That's awful for you, and my empathy goes to you. And yes, it's hard breaking your leg, especially if you've got a busy life. But stop comparing your circumstances to my circumstances. And that's like one of my big things that I talk about within the disability community is actually we're all lumped together under one umbrella of identification, and none of us in this Zoom call have any similar experiences to one another. You know, we could talk about awareness, we could talk about education, we could talk about identity, but within that, everyone has had completely different experiences. Disability is the only like identifying characteristics that you can enter and leave at any time in your life. No other protected characteristic has that quality about it. So actually it's very difficult, even amongst ourselves, to feel connected with one another sometimes, because, you know, I don't know what it's like to have a visual impairment. I don't know what it's like to have a hearing impairment. But we find ourselves being very empathetic towards one another because we have that kind of common argument amongst ourselves about how we wish we could just shake people and say like, oh no, I wish you understood. Stop saying you do, I wish you did. Just listen, stop talking at me, listen to what I'm saying, rather than saying, I get it, I get it. No, you don't need to listen. That'd be my thing, yeah.
Yeah, oh, I couldn't agree with that more. When people say, oh yeah, you know, I felt a bit depressed the other day. I totally get it. It's like,
No,
really? And we've got a reaction in the chat as well about, you know, medical professionals not liking when you know more, which, yeah, I've experienced that as well recently, listening to a podcast about my long-term mental health condition, and just being absolutely shocked by what the psychologist, allegedly expert in the field, was saying, which was, you know, so many assumptions, so many things that were absolutely untrue. Yeah, that's a big undertaking to change that, but obviously it's one of the big things that we do want to change. And you touched on so many other things. You touched on the importance of community as well, and being one in millions around the world. That makes it more difficult, and yet we have that wider disabled community, but like you said, it's a community that is different to other communities, because most communities are also built from an internal common characteristic. Okay, I'm French, I was born French, so I'm part of the French community, hey ho. But disability is actually more from an external perspective. Oh, we all face barriers, so that means we should get together and like try and break them down. But those barriers can be so drastically different, which is beautiful, right? We have an amazingly diverse community. And at the same time, it can be sometimes, as you say, challenging to come together. And obviously, there's so much ableism everywhere, and we've been separated, I think, on purpose, in so many ways. So breaking free that, but this is what you're intending to do, and through this disability pride idea. So I'd love to explore a little bit more about disability pride, those two words together. We don't come across that very often. What does that mean to you?
I think it's going back to what I said at the beginning, is reclaiming the word disabled and what it means. If you, my academic nerdiness coming out now, if you look back at the development of disability history, it's very often been led not by disabled people, it's been led by medical communities changing words. So if we think about, I'm not actually going to use the word, but trigger warning that I am going to use the first letter. If we think about the S word or the R word, you know, I don't need to say them, we all know what we're talking about here. Those words, we were told those weren't okay, not by disabled people, but by medical professionals who said it's time to move on. We have better medical knowledge. We're not going to categorize all these people together. We've now worked out that those individuals actually have different disabilities within their categories, and that's it. So we're going to separate them out. That actually those words originated from medical terminology, because it was just people who were disabled were lumped together as that's what's wrong with you. And quite often that's what's happened throughout in the early stages of disability history, was we weren't in charge of controlling the narrative as we started to progress our understanding of what it meant to be disabled. Now, if you think about the disability movement in terms of its age, it's a lot younger than other social movements. Really, the disability movement really kick-started in the 60s, 70s was when it's kind of really escalated from there, and now it's escalating even higher and higher. But because actually we're only in the initial stages of our development, if you think about women's rights movement, it's been hundreds and hundreds of years. Even the suffragettes was a lot longer ago than when we started really shouting our voices, that we haven't yet been able to take back control of the word of what it means to be disabled. And that's what disability pride is for me, is that wearing that identification, not as a bad thing that gets me benefits or gets me a blue badge or, gets me a third of my train fare or a free bus ride, actually claiming it back as I'm proud to be disabled. And it shouldn't be a characteristic that then defines my employment, defines what you think about how much I work, defines about who my friends are, defines about how you think I live as a person. And that's what disability pride is that disabled, you say it to someone outside of the arena who isn't diversity and inclusion aware, and they instantly, we all know where their mentality goes and what they picture in their mind as well. And it's actually about saying, disability doesn't look like anything. I know you think it does, and you have a very clear vision in your mind of what you think disabled people look like and behave like, and none of us work and none of us do anything and we just sit at home. But that's not the case at all. Some people do have to stay in their homes, but that's because there are so many barriers in the world that are preventing those individuals from being able to not just survive, but thrive. And so it's about reclaiming the identity of being disabled and what our characteristic means, and saying, actually, it's not a negative, it's a positive. There are negative things about it, yes, undeniable, but we all have periods of bad health in our life. Some of us just have more than others. And that's what we need to strip it back down to, and then promote the positive things about it. So it's not about running away from the negatives, because quite easily we can do that within the community and say, like, I can do anything I want, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, and like it's all positive and it's all amazing and it's all happy. It's just simply not true. And that's a very dangerous message to be promoting, that people should acknowledge that there's that side of them, like what I was saying at the beginning about acknowledging that there are things that I can't do, but learning that there are different things that I can do, or I can do things in a different way. And that's what disability pride means to me. Very long-winded way of saying.
Yeah. Oh, again, so much. I love it. I really do. I think the idea of reclaiming, and the idea of nuance, where it's not like you say I can do anything, but it's also not I can't do anything, right? I mean, there's so much nuance, there's so much variety, and there's so much to celebrate. And it's this ability to be positively realistic. I don't know if that's a word or an expression, but yeah, and to reclaim that disabled people, have totally the right and the gift to be seen and to be celebrated. And when I look back in generations prior, even in my family, and I just think, what happened to people, basically being locked inside out of shame. Mm-hmm. And for me, disability pride is kicking that shame to the curb and actually coming out, breaking those doors, breaking those barriers, or just opening them would be even better if we can. Thank you very much. But yeah, and I want to touch on that, actually. I want to touch on the barriers, because you've mentioned a couple of times, and I think I have used the word as well, ableism. Can you help us? Because I think a lot of people hear that word and they're like, oh, I have to pretend that I know what it means, but I'm not sure I know what it means. So can you define the word for us tonight?
Very timing, though. I just did a whole thing about it. So it's
brilliant.
So ableism, if you strip it down to its dictionary definition, is the prejudice or discrimination against disabled people. What the hell does that mean? In very layman's terms, we all know, okay, someone's not been given a job because they're disabled, or someone isn't making friends because they're disabled. We all understand that, but actually ableism goes a lot further than that, and that's currently this sort of second jump is where we're missing the education. I think we all now understand that it's ableist not to appoint someone because they've got a disability. Ableism is also the comments and the vocabulary that you use. So one bee in my bonnet is mainstream media still use the expression wheelchair bound. Now that's completely unacceptable. It's 2022. But for those that, you know, want a little bit more education about why we shouldn't say that, is it's the connotation of the word bound, that individual is bound to their wheelchair, that is their identity, that person is their wheelchair. That it's things like that, where that is ableist language to be using, but we haven't yet reached a point in society where people understand that. Or, you know, if you're in the school playground and someone says, oh, can I borrow your crutches? Or, you know, oh, I didn't think you'd be dyslexic, you're so good at reading. Or, you know, oh, I didn't know you were disabled, you would never have guessed by looking at you. All of this language is ableist language, but we don't as a society yet fully understand that. And that's what ableism is it's not just the surface discrimination, it's also the unconscious biases that are happening. And if you want to be really nerdy about it, internalized ableism is what's happened over generations and generations and thousands of years of discrimination against disabled people. It's where disabled people ourselves have adopted ableist attitudes, like what I was talking about when I was talking about my younger years, of that I thought I couldn't do anything because that's what I thought disabled people were like, that I adopted this form of ableism. So actually disabled people are just as guilty of ableist behavior, even towards each other sometimes, if they don't understand, you know, I don't know what it's like to have a hearing impairment. So I've gone out and educated myself. If I'm creating a platform where I'm talking on behalf of disabled people, I have to educate myself that I'm representing everybody and using the right language. But internalized ableism is when actually we're ableist against ourselves by saying, I can't do this, or, you know, I wish I was normal, or I wish, what is normal? That's ableist language against yourself, that sometimes actually we're being too harsh on ourselves, and that, you know, we need to look at the way we're behaving towards ourselves as well as the way society is behaving towards us. If that makes sense. A very brief description,
Yes.
isn't there?
100%. And I think you touched on very important points at the end about the internalized ableism, and that can lead to a lot of challenges around not seeking support as well, and not getting, you know, treatment out of feeling, oh, but if I'm diagnosed with something, then that means that, you know, I'm not like that, or something like. So all these attitudes are completely ingrained into our minds without realizing. And there's so much, you know, we say learning, right? And learning is very important indeed, but there's so much unlearning as well to do, which I think is really, really key. And if anyone is interested actually about finding out more, and I don't earn any commission on this, by the way, but I've just finished it and it's too good not to share. It's this book called Demystifying Disability by Emily Lado. And it does talk a lot about language. And the brilliant thing, I actually didn't think I was going to talk about this today, but it is really brilliant. It's got a table, and if you can't see this, don't worry about it. There's you know, different versions of this book, so I'll share it in the chat later on and in the comments on YouTube, so if you want to check it out later. But it's got basically a table of like, what is the ableist language and what is the better term to use. And that is so useful, especially when you're educating yourself. And it's done in a very simple, approachable way by someone from the community. And it actually is a surprisingly fun read as well, which it shouldn't be surprising. Again, you see, that's ableist, right?
I think one of the expressions that, and I guarantee, you know, that every person in this room will have done it at some point in their life, is when I'm having a period of really bad health, or I really don't feel well, either people say it to me or I say it to myself, as I think, yeah, but there's other people, you know, who are stage 4 cancer therapy, or there are other people that are quadriplegic, and I find myself putting us on a scale of severity, almost invalidating how I feel, because there's someone going through something of a different experience, which I have deemed to be a worse experience. And I hear my friends saying it to me as well. They go, well, you know, at least, or if I'm in hospital for 3 months or whatever it is, and someone says, yeah, but, you know, the woman opposite you's been there for 4. You know, my empathy goes for her and I feel awful for her, but it's that invalidation of our own feelings of, you know, be stoic, don't complain, it could be so much worse. And by doing that, you end up suppressing any sort of trauma, or you end up not processing your feelings properly, that it's perfectly valid to feel upset or feel sad or feel like the world isn't fair, or feel like you're being targeted, or that someone's out to get you, and why you, and have all these questions. But it's not fair to yourself to rank yourself on a scale of severity and try and, you know, justify how you're feeling, because that's it's not okay to do that. And that's again an example of internalized ableism. Is in my mind, I've deemed someone to be worse off than myself because they can't move their arms and their legs. You know, that's behavior that I used to do when I was younger, and now I know that not to be doing that to myself, and also not to be doing it to other people. And I think it's okay for us as a community to admit that we do have ableist tendencies towards each other sometimes, and that it's about unprocessing and unlearning that behavior that society has pushed on us as a correct thought process. I mean, we hear it, you know, not disabled people saying, well, you know, at least I'm not in a wheelchair, or whatever it may be. And that's devaluing that person's life so much. And that just saying that expression out loud, you don't know who's absorbing that information, whether it's a disabled person themselves that's now going to adopt that internalized ableism, or whether it's an individual who isn't disabled that's going to be passing that on and feeding it through society. You just don't know.
Yeah, and it's going to turn into biases that kind of feed on itself. Absolutely. Validation for ourselves and for others is so powerful. And it's a re-education piece of learning how to do that, especially when, you know, a lot of us have grown up in invalidating environments of different kinds. So we obviously, ableism, like you've just said, is ingrained in so many ways in ourselves, in the society that we live in. So, wow, big undertaking, a lot to do, big mountains to you know, wrestle with. I'm not sure we can wrestle mountains, but you see where I'm getting at. How do you think we can change this narrative? How do you think we can tackle ableism?
I mean, it's like 100 years ago asking how we can tackle racism. And we're at the sort of starting point of our journey now in comparison to all societal movements. And if you look at the history of how far racism and sexism have come in their social movement, what were the keys to those successes? And it was community. That's what it was it was people coming together. You know, you could talk to all the right people, individual here, an individual there, or an organization there. Google can put out a statement saying that they're, you know, diversity and accessible and inclusive, or whatever it may be. But it's not about just Google. It's about everybody coming together and being allies towards the movement. And quite often what happens with disability is that we talk amongst ourselves. So, you know, I go to conferences, I go to events, I speak to a room of people, and 99% of the people in the room are disabled identifying, or they're a carer, or they have lived experience in some other way, and they already know the information that I'm telling them. What we need to do is break outside of that arena and be getting together communities of people who don't understand disability inclusivity. And those are the people that we need to be talking to. If you look at the history of women's rights, what happened? You know, you had Emmeline Pankhurst running in front of horses to prove her point. I'm not saying we should do that, but it's about, as a community, making noise, because the community she created by doing an event like that, and there's no way, no legal sense, I'm not promoting anybody to do anything like that, but what I'm saying is it's about making that noise to encourage people to get behind the movement. And as soon as men started, it's unfortunate, but as soon as men started picking up on the sexism movement, then it shot up. And it wasn't because it was male versus female, it was because you had two sides of the arguments coming together to form one coin and one community, and that's why it lifted so far. But that's what we need to be doing to tackling ableism, is bringing people into the conversation who don't understand, who don't have that education, not cancelling people if they get it wrong, you know, not saying, you know, you're out, you're gone, we're angry with you, we don't want to talk to you anymore. Obviously, if someone is demonstrating persistent ableist behavior, you know, we take our calls and we cut them. But if somebody's made a genuine mistake because they don't understand, don't shout at that person, don't get angry, say to them, actually, we don't use language like that anymore. This is the reasons why, this is how it can make somebody feel. And that's the connotations behind that word. You really shouldn't be using that word. Learn from the mistakes and move on. That's one more person that's educated and into societal system. If we just keep getting angry and shouting at people and cancelling people, we're not going to make any difference, because all we're just doing is almost fueling a fire because we're not putting education into the system. So that's what we need to be doing, is speaking outside of our arena more is the biggest key to it, I think.
Open the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Open the bubble, expand the community, and get a lot of allies, I think, involved. And I really like how you linked it to how other movements evolved. There's, obviously a part of me that feels really sad that the movement is not further than it is. And at the same time, a part of me that feels really excited that we can learn from so many other movements in terms of, their journey, and hopefully do it faster and better.
Well, this is what I was thinking.
Do it together is what I was going to end on, is the bigger point. The rest was a joke. But yes, doing it together with the other communities as well, because also there's so much intersectionality. And you've touched on that, way earlier on, where, 1 in 5 people identifies as disabled. In that 1 in 5, there'll be people that are, from different ethnic minority backgrounds, that are from different genders, that or from the LGBT community, that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on, that there's so much intersectionality that we can really, I think, come together and really open this conversation, this dialogue, and the community. So we are getting to the end of that little chat, and I really want to bring everybody that's here into the conversation. Before we do that, is there any kind of final point that you would love for, if there's one thing that you want everyone on here to remember from this talk, what would it be?
I think it would be what I said at the beginning, which is showing up for yourself is so important, and having that confidence in yourself. And I am guilty of it now, that sometimes I get up for work and I'm like, my job is to promote how amazing disabled people are, and that we need to be breaking down those barriers, and we can achieve what we want to achieve if society around us is just a little bit more accessible. But sometimes I wake up and I think, I can't do this today. I just can't do it. I haven't got the energy and I haven't got the strength. And that's okay for me to sit there and be like, actually today, Celia is priority today. Work isn't priority. LinkedIn isn't priority. Talking at an event is not priority. Today, my priority is myself. And as a disabled woman with a physical health condition, that's sometimes what I have to do. And that doesn't mean today is a failure. It doesn't mean today I didn't do anything. I did a lot today. It just wasn't the stereotypical thing that you think is productive. And that's what we need to be doing, is looking as a society how we define productivity. We work 9 to 5. The reason we work 9 to 5 is that we had our industrial development during the Victorian era, where electricity was sparse and we were using candlelight. It's 2022. I think we can all move on from how we were working in the Victorian era by candlelight. But it's things like that where, I can work at 1 in the morning because I'm awake, got insomnia. It's just what's going to happen. But it's about looking at my life. How can I do things differently? And just accepting that sometimes just showing up for myself is the best thing I can do that day. And it's an achievement, because not everybody gets to go through what I'm dealing with every day.
I feel like clapping to that, because I don't know about everyone watching, but I 100% need to hear this. I hope it's going into my brain.
I need to hear it to myself sometimes.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of, being sometimes defined by the to-do list. So I said sometimes, I don't even know why I said that, because that's not the entire truth, but we'll leave it as that. Thank you so much, Celia, for this, and everyone watching the recording. This is obviously the end of the little journey with us today. So thanks for joining. We have our next episode coming up, and it's already on Eventbrite. It's going to be on the 24th of November, and it's about minority stress and the connection with creativity and resilience. So it should be really insightful. And then actually in December, we're still finalizing the date, but I'm going to be inviting everyone who took part in this 1 year of the inclusion conversation. That's 22 speakers. I don't think everyone will be able to join us, but hopefully quite a few. And we'll be doing a bit of a retrospective on, everything that we've learned and shared. And we will do that together with anyone attending live. We'll be doing a bit of a little workshop-y style inclusion conversation in December. You can follow us on Instagram, that's at @BBeyondBorders, and also subscribe to the newsletter on bbeyondborders.com. And then finally, with done a lot this year. I started this project in January. I just really wanted to create community. I really wanted to learn together and to chat with people that just wanted the same thing in terms of creating a more inclusive world. And so far, this is episode number 12, and we've covered lots of different topics. So if you want to rewatch any of them, they're on the Be Beyond Borders YouTube channel. And if you give it a subscribe, that would be super, super helpful. So thank you so much for anyone watching the recording, and see you hopefully live for the next episode so you can the second half.